your moderator today. Again, please take advantage of the mute so that we can minimize the ambient noise that will undoubtedly occur. Like in my case, there will be some barking dogs. And so when I'm not talking, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. I'd like to ask Paul Lingo to start us off by talking about today's learning objective and why this is so timely. Paul? And do unmute yourself, Paul.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you all hear me? Well, thank you all for joining us this morning in the new way of meetings while we're going through this hard time in our industry. You know, tell you a little bit about the IEC Rocky Mountain Safety Committee a little bit, and then give you kind of an outline of how we want this meeting and this session to progress. And so each month, IEC Rocky Mountain has a safety forum that we put together that's basically communicating with our industry partners and our contractor members to see what's in their crystal ball for safety and what topics are they experiencing within their own businesses in regards to safety concerns. We usually can't come up with this schedule a year in advance so we can align safety presenters and subject matter experts to facilitate and kind of help navigate and get the conversation going. Just so happens we got really lucky. This March meeting was already scheduled to be for emergency preparedness, and it just so happens with everything that we're going through that emergency preparedness fits right into the schedule. So each month, last Wednesday of each month, we hold a safety forum for those that are new to the audience and are unaware of what our safety forum is really all about. So if it's something you're interested in, today is going to be a great topic. We normally have a flow of different things we talk about before we get the forum started, but because of the large audience and kind of the focus of today's discussion, we're going to start jumping right into some dialogue about basically the title, how are we really when it comes to dealing with the COVID-19 situation, not just at home, but how is it affecting your work? How is it affecting your manpower? What are some things we need to know and things we need to keep in mind as we forward think our new processes and how we conduct business? What we have today is a few safety presenters or subject matter experts when it comes to this. You got introduced to Deb Radman. Thank you so much for moderating and help putting this together. So she'll be chiming back and forth as far as the dialogue. But we do have Kristin White, attorney at law with Fisher Phillips, joining us today as a subject matter expert. John Crawmer with Pinnacol Assurance. He's part of their safety services. He'll be serving as a subject matter expert today. Dustin Green, he's going to serve as a subject matter expert of how right now the electrical industry is being impacted. He is the general superintendent and safety officer for Integrity Electric. And then we also have Eugene Wade joining us today. He's the executive director of the Colorado Emergency Preparedness Partnership, joining us to help us along with this conversation. So kind of the way we want this to go, as Deborah had mentioned, get into that chat box, ask a few questions. Let's make sure that, you know, even though we've got a lot of participants in today's meeting, we do want to make sure that we get your questions answered. And hopefully when we walk away from this meeting today, we can understand some best practices out of the dialogue, some strategy moving forward. How do we get back to normal one day, and how ultimately did we get here? So I'm going to go ahead and open it back up, let you know, have a great meeting, and I'm going to be in the background trying to help any way that I can, but I'm going to pass it back over to Deborah when it comes to introduce the subject matter experts. So Deborah, you want to take it from here?
I've got it. Thank you, Paul. All right. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our guests today, who will bring their own particular lens and expertise to the discussion. I'd like to start with asking each of you to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your perspective on what's going on and how it applies to this particular audience, electrical contracting. So let's begin with Eugene. Eugene, would you say a few words about yourself and talk about how you are viewing this situation? And you need to unmute. Oh, you are unmuted. Not hearing, can't hear you, Eugene, huh? Try again.
That noise? These are my headphones. I can only hear it.
What do you do? Basic.
No. I'm in a meeting.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
These are all different people.
If you're not muted, please click on the microphone at the bottom left. And Eugene, we're going to try and see if we can get you some audio. Can you just give me an audible, please? Not hearing Eugene at all.
And I don't think he knows. We can't hear him.
Okay. Well, why don't we go to Kristin? Why don't you give it a try, Kristin, and see what, let's get us started and I'll work on Eugene.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So good morning, my name is Kristin White. I'm a partner with Fisher Phillips here in Denver. I practice in the area of workplace safety and do a lot of employment advice and counsel. Used to handling a lot of crisis management. Usually though, that's one client at a time. So the last couple of weeks have been quite different. From our perspective with COVID-19, we've really watched the issues develop by the way we've been counseling our clients, and particularly construction clients. So I'm going to hit just a few of those points so you can kind of see kind of how the issue has evolved over the last couple of weeks. When we first got involved in the issue, the questions and most of the concerns were really around exposure issues. You know, how do we respond to an employee who's tested positive in our workplace or our work site? You know, what do we do if we have an employee come to us and tell us that they've been exposed? You know, what do we do with them? That's really kind of where the issue first started. The second phase, as I'll call it, that we've been dealing with started with leave issues. So, you know, people need to take time off because they've been exposed. You know, is that paid? Is it unpaid? What if we need to do layoffs? You know, talking about the difference between layoffs and furloughs and even unemployment insurance. You know, so really getting into kind of nuts and bolts of employment issues. The next step that we've started dealing with, and probably most of you are looking at right now, is the state legislation that first came out, the paid sick days, you know, which didn't apply to the construction industry. It was pretty limited. But now we have the federal legislation that's come out that requires the paid sick leave and the paid emergency FMLA, you know, for in certain circumstances. It's very defined when you have to provide those things, but they apply to small employers. And so that's really been the new part of this is, you know, most small employers are not used to FMLA and being mandated to provide paid sick leave. So, you know, the hard part and what we've been dealing with, I guess, is having new legislation dropped, going into effect in 15 days. We're waiting on regulations that will tell us exactly how that's going to be enforced. Very unprecedented. You know, typically with regulations, we have notice and comment period. We have time to kind of digest it, and there's not time now. So it's really a matter of, you know, getting the law. How can we best understand it and best advise employers? The next issue is really employee refusals to come to work. And that's what we've been seeing this week. We have a lot of shutdown orders going into effect. Those of you in the construction industry are considered essential. So you're not typically subject to those. There are a couple states where you are, but not in Colorado. But we've been getting employee refusals to work. And so dealing with that issue. And then lastly is just, you know, how does this wrap up with OSHA? We still have OSHA enforcement. OSHA's telling us COVID-19 exposures in the workplace are recordable, potentially reportable. And so, dealing with, that where you have all these employee issues and the employment issues at the same time, you still have your government regulations. So it's really been an interesting time. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristin. I do think we have Eugene back now. Eugene, you want to test that audio?
Yes, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Yay.
Awesome.
Okay. All right, where did you go, Eugene? We thought we had you. There you are.
Okay, there. For some reason it muted me, but you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm Eugene Wade. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Emergency Preparedness Partnership. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that promotes emergency preparedness planning between the private, public, and philanthropic sectors of Colorado. During Blue Skies, we normally do this through workshops, events. We sit on a number of boards and committees throughout the state. We're a member of the state's Homeland Security All Hazards Advisory Council. I chair the private sector subcommittee. Marilyn sits on that committee for us. That represents all the private sector interests regarding to the Homeland Security strategy that the state has for preparedness. We do a lot of other chemical safety workshops throughout the states for different counties. We do other workshops. We had one at IECRM last year, a crisis communications workshop that the state PIO put on. So anyway, our normal role, like I said, during Blue Skies is really promoting that preparedness function. Now that the COVID-19 is upon us, we found ourselves in more of a response and recovery role. Unfortunately, the state was in between the public sector liaison position right now. Their new person isn't expected to come on until mid-April. So the state asked me to step up, and I sit at, remotely. I am the Emergency Support Function 14 private sector liaison for the state of Colorado at their Emergency Operations Center. And it's been extremely busy the last few weeks. Last month, actually, we stood up just the very beginning of March. March 2nd was when the EOC was activated at its lowest level. Now it's a combined, unified coordination and center, and that's because CDPHE, Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and a couple of other agencies are all co-located to deal with the COVID-19 emergency for the governor. I sit on a couple of councils, the COVID-19 Relief Fund for the governor's office, as well as the Economic Recovery Group for the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. So again, our role has pivoted more to an active role in this response and recovery. Kind of like Kristin mentioned before, we've been seeing a lot of concerns from the private sector about who's an essential worker, making sure that trucks can get through shelter in place or lockdown areas in the state, ones that have already locked down or the ones that are thinking about locking down. We're advising the governor's office so that when he does make these decisions, he's taken into account much of the private sector's interest in here, so that it's maybe some of the collateral essential businesses that aren't necessarily think of, but that support critical infrastructure can remain on that list and don't get left off. And that's about it for me for now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Eugene. Why don't we have John give us a little overview of your perspective? And I love your background. It's a beautiful Rocky Mountain background. Okay, we not hearing you.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I do a double mute feature to make sure I don't by happenstance. So thank you for inviting me to participate in this opportunity. Indeed, it's an unprecedented time whereupon we've been able to, I think, unite our and maybe realign ourselves. And so with Pinnacol Assurance obviously being the leader in the workers' comp industry for the state of, customers in the state of Colorado. We've been getting a lot of questions on what's compensable and what's recordable, similar to what Kristin mentioned just a minute ago. And we've got some great resources online to help out with that. But yeah, just a little bit about me. You know, I've been with Pinnacol Assurance now for over 8 years, and prior to that worked for an electrical contractor and managed a safety program for them. And through a series of events, got into safety and health, and got a business degree and a bunch of safety certifications, and still teach at the IEC Southern Colorado chapter. So helping to represent that. But with regards to, you know, this COVID-19 and Pinnacol Assurance, I think what we've really been focusing on is aligning ourselves with trusted resources. You know, there's so much content out there on this subject that I think it's important that we partner as industry associations, and you know, IECRM is a great example of this, and really helping to stay calm and focus on what truly is essential for me to do as an employer. You know, so again, the two biggest questions we've been getting is this a compensable claim, and is this an OSHA recordable? So I've prepared a document that I can share later, and we can dive into that a little bit more, but that's an introduction from me, and welcome to the forum this morning.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. By the way, folks, please feel free to start submitting any questions that you have via the chat bubble, and I will start to field those in just a few minutes. But next, I'd like to ask Dustin Green to say a few words from his perspective as a contractor and head of safety at Integrity Electric. Dustin?
Good morning, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Dustin, just need to hear you a little bit louder.
Okay. Good morning, I'm Dustin Green. I'm the construction superintendent and safety manager at Integrity Electrical Solutions. I've been here about a year now, and I've been in safety for about 6 months. And it's, you know, I'm pretty good with working with the safety and the project flow of other contractors. That's one of my top priorities. I've been continuing recently with my normal duties as with the field superintendent, which include visiting every project at least once a week and trying to practice the social distancing while I'm doing that, washing my hands as much as I can, you know, and while I'm on site, just trying to talk with the guys and make sure to help keep them calm about not overreacting about a lot of the news and a lot of the internet things that are going around. And I think one of the biggest problems that we're having is all the false information that's coming out, you know, and people just not checking everything, which is unfortunately, it's just terrible. But what we've been dealing with when people are sick and everything is we have an emergency response team that we've set up with our owners group and our HR department. And if anybody's sick, we, you know, obviously we follow the CDC's guidelines of stay at home first and self-isolate, and make sure that you get in touch with your doctor to see if you have all the symptoms, and if a test is available, you know, that you can get one. And then, you know, all this is going through HR so that we can make sure that we can follow all the HIPAA laws and all that kind of stuff that a lot of people aren't totally aware of. You know, our general electricians are just not all that caught up with all the laws, you know, and that's why we have an HR department. So it's imperative that we're using them. So really, it's just really where we are right now. Everything, as we all know, is such a moving target. We're all still kind of going through everything. We are tracking our hours that anybody has missed time through our PTO program and through HR, so that when all this legislation does get fixed out, there is a way that we can separate any hours that are lost. So that's kind of where we are.
Okay, thank you, Dustin. again, please submit your questions if you would via the chat function so that I can, excuse me, read them, and we can start to get this discussion getting more specific to each of your concerns. Dustin, let me ask you, what is, first off, what is the biggest challenge you see in the workplace, on the job right now?
Well, I think in anywhere, you know, as soon as somebody coughs, everybody looks at them with a dirty look and wants to run away, you know, which, you know, it's going to happen. But I've got one project where the general contractor has really been strict about everything, you know, being very inquisitive and possibly overstepping some boundaries, but we've been pretty vague and sent them through HR to discuss any of this. But the general contractor's employees on site have all started wearing masks, and they did open up, it's a TI, so there's an operational restroom, so they opened up the sinks for us to wash hands, which was really nice. But I think, you know, that's just so many unanswered questions, so much of a moving target right now that nobody knows really the right way to deal with a lot of this. So it's really hard to get the field to feel comfortable coming to work every day. I'm not having anybody currently that is afraid to go to work, so that's good. And being, you know, we're obviously lucky to be in the emergency or the essential group of personnel. And currently I only have 2 people that are out sick. Not sure why they weren't able to get a test, but they are doing their 14-day self-quarantine, so trying to get all that squared away.
Okay, great, thank you. We have a few questions coming in now, but I'd like to ask John to address the same
Sure.
thing. From your perspective, John, what is the biggest concern that you're encountering right now?
Yeah, I think one of the questions that I noticed there on the chat box is, as far as work comp claims in OSHA, how are employers supposed to handle employees that end up with COVID-19? How can we decipher which claims would be work comp and or recordable? So again, one of the number 1 questions is, did the employee get medical treatment beyond first aid, right? That's always one of the big first questions to ask to determine if it is OSHA recordable. And then there's 3 things, and it needs to be a preponderance of evidence that, number 1, if this is OSHA recordable, the case is confirmed as a case of COVID-19 per the CDC, you know, guidelines there. So it's a confirmed case of COVID-19. Number 2, the case is work-related. And for work-relatedness, then that will need to be identified using the OSHA regulation 1904.5. And then number 3, the case involves 1 or more of general recording criteria that it is beyond first aid. So is it beyond first aid, it's work-related, and the case is confirmed COVID-19. So that's really the 3 filters that need to be met to make it an OSHA recordable. For workers' comp, indeed, there has to be a preponderance of evidence that the infection arose while performing essential job functions during the normal course and scope of work. That is such a critical component to really prove. And how do we do that when there's an outbreak like this? So it's going to be hard. But Kristin, maybe you have some additional perspective or through that legal lens there.
Yeah, Kristin, go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry, I was just taking myself off mute. No, I agree with what John was saying with the work relatedness. I mean, I think the confirmed case, as John, as you mentioned, I think that's key here is that, you know, we don't have a lot of testing going on. And so unless we have a confirmed case, you know, to me, it's not going to fall into the recordable until it has been confirmed through testing. The work relatedness, you know, what I've been advising people is if if someone comes into your workplace and they have COVID, and they've, have been positively identified as having it, having COVID-19, and you had no other exposures in the workplace that you know of, then to me, it's not work related at that point. But if we have someone who has a positive case, we have someone else who, worked closely with that person, they end up now with COVID, a week or so later. To me now, I think we're getting to the work relatedness. So that's how I've been looking at it. John, I'd love to hear kind of you come back on and see what you think of that. But that's really how we've been advising on it, because we're not getting any guidance from OSHA on that other than, well, if it's work related. Well, I've tried to look at it as well. If we didn't have any evidence of exposure in the workplace, then we're not going to assume work relatedness in this case.
Yeah, I agree, Kristin. And here, let me give you a hypothetical scenario. I've been thinking a lot about this, especially as it relates to the skilled craft worker. Let's say you've got a skilled electrical technician. He rolls up in a van to a healthcare facility or a long-term care center, and he or she, right? Let's say the worker rolls up to that facility, or let's say they do in-home repairs on an electrical system for somebody who's in isolation. So these are the hypothetical scenarios that I believe our industry is confronted with, electrically speaking. So health care, long-term care center, residence where somebody could be in isolation, and now your worker has to go in and make repairs on an electrical system to make sure that fan coil unit, that VAV is still running, that filter that the HVAC technician replaced to a higher level HEPA filter, now he bumped something and now the thing's not working. So a skilled craft worker's got to go in and make those repairs. Now, in these situations, we must evaluate the employee's work duties and the environment to decide whether or not one or more of those events or exposures in the work environment caused or contributed to result in a condition or significantly aggravate a pre-existing condition, which that doesn't really apply, but that's the OSHA regulation. So in the normal course and scope of the employee's work duties, did that contribute to contracting COVID-19? And there's got to be a preponderance of evidence to substantiate that. So that's going to be a challenge. And Kristin's right that if you can prove those things, then it could be an OSHA recordable, and it could be a compensable work comp claim. I've not seen any of this yet. I've not heard of any yet. It's also new and fresh that I've not seen or heard of anybody getting a work comp claim. Has anybody else? I'd just be curious.
Eugene, what about you?
As far as claims or workforce?
Well, claims and some of the stuff that we're experiencing that, or we're anticipating experiencing as far as some of this goes.
These, I really don't get down onto those details like the last two speakers were talking about, and claims and everything. Mine is more just to be that liaison with the private sector, with the state, and what type of policies they might roll out, what concerns that they have, so that we can ensure that private sector is still able to, the ones that are able to operate with the least amount of intrusions or setbacks. One of the things I've been promoting is the state's Business Emergency Operations Center. They have a website, coloradobeoc.com, where businesses can go and get signed up into the state's Business Emergency Operations Center. Once they're signed up, they'll get access to situational reports and coordination calls on needed resources, or if we think that a certain sector is being impacted, we'll do a coordination call with those members in the database to find out what their needs are so that the state can react to that. Again, I'm kind of the point of contact for that. Feel free to share my contact information after the meeting. Any businesses on here that want to reach out to me to find out more, I can send you an email on instructions on how to get tied into the BEOC. And then if you're experiencing any concerns operating or worried about restrictions in operations, pass that on to me. If I know the answer, I'll let you know. If not, I can get it to somebody who can provide us that answer.
Perfect, thank you. We have a question here from David Scott, basically asking if he's curious to know if anyone is editing their PTO policy, anyone over 500 employees. He's aware of the legislation for under 500, but I think I'd like to have one of you jump in on or raise your hand if you are editing your PTO policy, and also to our speakers, especially Kristin and John, is that something that should be done?
I'm happy to jump in on that one. You know, I wouldn't recommend editing your PTO policy with the new leave that's coming out. What we've been recommending is actually tracking it separately. So if you have your, you know, everyone gets 10 days a year of PTO, you know, obviously by your policy, you can change that at any time. But for the COVID situation and with the federal legislation, if you're under 500 employees, just track the 80 hours that they're requiring separately. And the reason for that is that those 80 hours of the paid sick leave have very specific requirements of what you can take and how much you can get, and I mean what the caps are, if someone's wage is higher than what, you know, would be. So there's caps on it. You have your tax credit issue. So I'd recommend, you know, if you're thinking, if the question came but you're editing it because of these new laws, I'd say track it separately because the new law has such specific requirements for it. And, you know, like I said, the legislation right now is those under 500. We've not heard about legislation coming out for those greater than 500. The reason that we've, you know, heard that is that, you know, the government has decided, well, if you have more than 500 employees, you can manage this without government intervention, meaning that, you know, you likely already have PTO policies and you should have the funds to manage it. So that's what we've heard. Whether that changes or not, we'll see, but that's what we've heard for right now.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to repeat the website that Eugene referred to for the Colorado Business Emergency Operations Center. I am gonna copy it and send it to you all via chat. One second. It is www.colorado.gov/COBEOC. And it will be to everyone in your chat. Okay, next question. Oh, and John also submitted a URL to everyone to support Kristin's comments, and it is the shrm.org resources and tools website. Looks like there are a lot of topics that are addressed: benefits, health, wellness, leave benefits, how to help employees with coronavirus. So if you do not see that in your chat feature, just let me know, and I will make sure I send it to you directly here. From Jay, there is a question that he'd like to pose to the group and to our guests today. When it comes to things getting back to normal, what do you expect projects on hold due to the current environment and projects scheduled for later in the year? How do you expect them to coexist, or will they be postponed, be taken care of first and future projects pushed out? What is kind of the sequence of things that we think are to be expected with regard to scheduling and catching up? Would someone like to address that? Dustin, maybe?
Yeah, sure. What we've noticed is our service department really hasn't, and actually our construction sites have actually ramped up a little bit. We have a restaurant that was originally planning on doing an occupied remodel in Denver. Well, when they shut down all the restaurants, that kind of ramped up into full speed so that we can get it done while everything was closed. We've also been continuing to get projects that were scheduled to start are still coming in, and planning to start on time. You know, I think everybody's not so hesitant, being that we're all considered the emergency personnel or whatever. So that's kind of helpful. And I haven't seen a decline of new projects coming through the door yet. So I hope that everything continues. You know, still a moving target, so we'll still have to see how it goes.
Okay, thank you. I know a couple of you have sent in a few comments about the fact that postponing until the trades catch up or needing to have more skilled trade workers becomes a real heavy subject weighing on everyone's mind. And I would love to hear from some of you about how you're feeling about what could be a tremendous impact on the continuing shortage of skilled workers as things start to try to get back to normal. I'd like to open it up a little bit. So if someone would like to chime in, that would be great from your perspective. Just give me a little notice so that I can make sure you're unmuted.
This is Paul. Deb, one of the things, can you all hear me? One of the things that we've been communicated to about is the bottleneck right now for permits and electrical inspections is really what we're finding a big issue. You know, it's not even so much, even though it's impacted the manpower out there on job sites, you know, as we are considered the essential workforce, but some entities within our realm are not, you know, and so such as code enforcement and permitting. And so I know that for contractors to be able to wrap one job up, right, and move to the next, there is that process of code enforcement and inspection. So I'm really seeing or getting communications from a lot of our contractors that is where the real hang up is happening, is trying to figure out how to, one, right, get the permits going for a job right now, and two, how do we wrap it up as per inspection. So they're having meetings right now as far as the state goes. I know that local jurisdictions here in Colorado are having this discussion and trying to come up with different options on how we can keep the code enforcement going on. I know that there are inspectors out there working it. I talked to Chris Papp last night out at Commerce City. He's an inspector, and he inspected just by himself yesterday 20 jobs. And so inspections and everything like that are happening, but I think that with the self-volunteer to distance and individuals dropping out of the workforce right now, it's not even so much maybe even permitting and code enforcement. It's just manpower to be able to do that aspect as well. So that's what the communications I've received as far as a bottleneck goes.
Thank you, Paul. Hey, Jeremy Harms, you made a comment that following initial health concerns, the whole topic of catch-up, postponement, and worker availability is heavy on your mind lately. Would you like to address that a little bit?
Hello, thank you for having me on this morning.
Hi, Jeremy.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add to it. It's just, you know, there's so many unknown factors still and questions out there. There was some good insight just given there, and I know a lot of progress is still pushing forward, but at the same time with 50% of the workforce and so many employees out sick and what have you, and not all suppliers are open. So it's just, you know, weighing heavy on my mind lately as far as what the future looks like and what that will look like with contract obligations and such.
To one of our speakers, is there anything you would like to add to this? Kristin, John?
Oh, the only other thing I was thinking about is that more along the lines of health and safety here is oftentimes we're getting questions about how do I know if my employee has COVID-19? Where do I go? How do I evaluate this? So again, per the CDC's guidelines, if you think you might have symptoms, stay at home, right? And for the expectation is that we would not be just going to a clinic or an emergency room just because we're feeling some of these symptoms. There is a free nurse line and I'll share the link here with you. But if you're unable to go to a primary care provider, or really what the preference would be to just self-isolate, then you can actually make a phone call to a free nurse line and get some professional advice. And that might be a way to help calm the situation, because we still have influenza, we still have cold virus, there's still the common cold going around too. And so it's hard to differentiate sometimes, and we might be in a situation where we want to just, oh my gosh, I've got COVID-19, go get the test. Well, we know that there's a limited amount of tests available. And we also don't want to expose our healthcare professionals unnecessarily either, right? So CDPHE has established a general helpline for COVID-19 related questions as well, and I will share that with you. And I think that's a way to help go to a trusted source and keep everybody calm during these types of situations.
Thank you, John. Let's talk for a minute about staying calm. Does anybody have any experience of late about how you are attempting to do that and assure others to remain calm in the face of all of this? Anybody want to wave at me or send me a little message saying I would like to address that?
Dustin, would you like to chat? I saw you raise your hand.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah, so one thing that we've been doing is just trying to ramp up our communication from the office with our response team to our field. We haven't before done a newsletter or anything like that, but we're going to start doing a newsletter, and also our foreman's meetings. We conduct those every other Monday, and we have very much encouraged our people, our foremen, to share all of our information. And we've just been gathering information from everywhere. Our email boxes have all been flooded with links to this, and I know John is also probably in the meeting yesterday with AGC, that they talked a lot about that stuff as well, and how everybody's dealing with everything. And I think the biggest thing that we can do is communicate with our people and encourage questions, because if you leave them on an island, they're gonna freak out. And I think the best thing that we can do is just let them know everything that we can, as soon as, while we're fact checking everything as well.
And to that point, Dustin, I saw a recent survey yesterday from a very reputable communications organization that I know very, very well, that emphasizes that the best source of information and assistance is the employer. With all of the confusion and the squabbling going on with government and a lot of the infodemic, which means the preponderance of information that is just, bombarding us, you are the first line and the most trustworthy source of information for your people, according to this latest survey, Trust Barometer, by the Edelman public relations firm. Kristin, do you want to chime in here on some of this?
Yes, I was just going to add, along the lines of the resources, Fisher Phillips, we've actually turned our website into, like our main page website, into a COVID resource page. And on that, there's a lot of free documents that we've put out that normally you probably have to pay for. So there's a lot of free resources. We put presentations out. So it's just the fisherphillips.com. It's our main webpage. And you'll see when you scroll down, they just put so many resources. We've gotten a lot of good feedback on it. So when you're looking at, I think that was a great point, Deb, about the best source of information coming from the employer. So that's what we've tried to do, is take our webpage and put out, where you can take different templates and, customize those for your workplace. And, we put our presentations out there so you can try to get information on some of the new laws. So really, yeah, trying to, help employers have that resource. Because I think Dustin raises a good point of, where are you getting this information from? So yeah, we've really tried to help people there.
That's great. In fact, I'd like to note that IECRM has been putting out a daily update, and maybe Marilyn, you could chat a little bit about how that's working in terms of information flow and any kind of feedback you've gotten about what you've been doing on a daily basis.
Sure. Thank you, Deb. Thanks to everyone who's on the call this morning. I'm not sure how many of you were Zoom experts prior to 10 days ago, but we have been conducting business via Zoom, and it is all working quite well. But we dove into these waters a week or two ago now, and have been trying to make sure that we can be a pulse for what's happening in the organization, what's happening in our electrical contractor and partner community. What are the things that we can do in order to be able to be a voice and advocate for you as policies are rising to the top, as information needs to be shared? We do want to be one of those trusted resources, and I love that John has specifically highlighted some of the websites and things that we're relying on to be able to push forward to our members. The Fisher and Phillips daily update that has been happening and now, just updated on the website. After this meeting, we will be sending out those resources to all the participants and also to all of our members. We've already been encouraging them to sign up for those newsletters. We're continuing to include them in our links on our daily emails, but that is a valuable source of information on labor and employment and OSHA and safety and other things that are, that are happening as this evolves. For all of you on the call, I really would like to hear what your questions and concerns and experiences are, particularly at this time. We believe that this association environment is the best place for us to be able to collect that information and share it with you. If one of you is being challenged or has a question about something, it is very likely that that is true across industry, and we want to be able to share that and be a voice for you. I can tell you that over the last week, we worked very hard with the governor's office, with Eugene through the Emergency Preparedness Partnership and other resources, other construction organizations, to ensure that the construction industry, particularly skilled trades and electricians, as well as certain aspects of the solar industry even, were included as essential workers in this environment. So if there are other things that we can be working on behalf of you for, I would love to hear about them today, or call me or email me at any time so that we can continue to be that voice. As Paul mentioned, we are currently working on the inspection issues around how do we keep them going so that projects can continue to move forward, but still in a way that clearly is safe for the project, that is safe for the owner, that is safe for the subcontractor, as well as the inspectors. We want to make sure that we are continuing that, but we know that those online virtual visual inspections are working in some communities, and we want to be able to take that and spread that and move that forward. And we're very happy that the state has taken that request and is working on their capabilities and capacity and opportunities to be able to keep them moving forward. But if you aren't getting our daily emails, please let us know either via the chat or you can email me at maryanne@iecrm.org, and we'll make sure that you are included in the information updates that we're sending out. Thank you, Deb.
Thanks, Marilyn. Russell Tafoya, you mentioned here that you are doing regular communication from a single person to your entire company. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Sure. We know that instead of different department heads trying to cascade the same message, there's some subtleties and nuances that the whole group can hear differently. So we've gotten back to our CEO doing a regular or a daily communication. Here's the updates. Work is work is still happening in place. Here's what to do. Just trying to remind people that things are going to be okay. Produces some calm. We have a focus group that meets daily, and then we do a weekly newsletter that captures links, because despite as much communication as we send out, sometimes it's not enough. Some people need verification from multiple sources, it seems, right? So we've really gotten on top of that, and we'll do business updates with each of our departments within our COVID focus group, so that we can address the next day and any changes that are happening in legislation and in the industry, on our projects and that. So does that answer the question, I think?
Yes, thank you. I think that you're doing it textbook correct, and it does need to come from the top in many cases. So using your CEO as that mouthpiece is a very wise decision, as long as everyone else in the organization, especially at the mid-level management, is on the same page, and you have consistent messaging throughout. So we have a question from Patrick Conlon. Given how unrealistic it is to adhere to CDC standards in the field, and with all the construction being considered essential, is anyone concerned with the moral hazard of continuing to build non-essential items and putting workers and the larger community at risk, given that much of the discussion in the media seems to be surrounding dollars and cents? Anybody want to tackle that? Any of our speakers? That's a tough one.
Well, Deb, may I add to that?
Yes, please.
This actually, Patrick, is a question that I've been fielding from other contractors in this work in the city and county of Denver and with the state of Colorado, including construction as essential. It is a conversation that we've been having, and I think it's interesting because the industry is essential in the work that's being done in hospitals, in the work that's being done in support industries, keeping the grocery stores open, and in other areas. So that's why we really focused on it being an essential industry, because we don't want any of the things that are that are our current definition of first responders, if you will, in the situation. We want to make sure that they're able to continue to work. But we have had questions from other contractors that have said, is this really essential in all of that stream? And I think that's probably going to come down to individual company decisions about how they handle certain situations. But at the same time, many of those may be under contract. And that's another element of this question that I have seen in the last couple of weeks is, what about that contractual responsibility? And that falls over then into a legal category that maybe Kristin or someone else can speak to. But it's a valid and very good question, and something that I know from a moral and ethical perspective, people have been trying to figure out. Do I keep people home? Do I shut down for a period of time like others have been asked to do? Or do I continue to move the work forward? So yeah, I don't have an answer, but it definitely is a question.
Yeah, I
Chris?
think the only real answer is adhere to the practices and policies that are being put out there as far as social distancing, and trying to adhere to not wearing gloves and this and that, keeping things clean. I think what we have to go off of, if we're going to keep our workforce out there, regardless of essential or non-essential, let's stay as close as we can to some of these policies that are being put out. So if there is a risk, we're trying to minimize it.
Yeah. Kristin, any thoughts?
No, I mean, I think Marilyn raised, the key issues there. And, I appreciate what Paul said, that it's a matter of how close can we adhere to the CDC guidelines. And I think it becomes the business decision that if we can't adhere to it, do we hit that point that we have to shut the work down? I'm with Marilyn. Those are really hard. Those are hard issues. And it comes from the business side. Where do you start to draw those lines?
Yeah, exactly. A few of you have also kind of brought the other sort of question into play here, and that is, when you are essential and you are trying to continue to adhere to the CDC guidelines and continue to produce or do work, what about employees who refuse to work? What do we do there?
So I'm happy to take that one. Kind of two sides of it. So from the legal side is that, an employee is permitted to refuse to work if he believes there's an imminent danger. And that's really the standard from OSHA, is this imminent danger. We, so far have been saying we don't think we're hitting that legal test for imminent danger. That may change depending on where things go. What does this look like in reality, or when you're dealing with it on the job site? So if an employee comes to you and says, I'm not comfortable working, the first thing you need to do is ask them why, and really have a conversation with them as to what are they not comfortable with. Do we have the right PPE? Is it a social distancing issue? And having a conversation with them about what could make them more comfortable. I've had to litigate work refusal cases, and they're very messy. So, which is why my advice is always, it's not usually just one conversation you're going to have with that employee. It's probably going to be two conversations, even, to say, okay, here's the steps we've taken. Here's what we're doing. Does this make you comfortable? And really eliciting from them, if they're still not comfortable, why are you not comfortable now? Have them, are there other steps that you want to see us take? That becomes really important if you end up in litigation down the road, as to, did we get their input? Because at some point, after maybe two conversations and we've done everything we can, they don't have any more ideas of what could make them feel safe. They just are scared to work, which, can be legitimate here. At some point it becomes insubordination, and you have the right as the employer to replace that employee if you need to for economic concerns. So, that's also becomes a little bit of a, employee relation issue. Do you end up letting that employee go home and they have unpaid leave? But you do legally have the right to replace them if you need to get the job done, especially for construction and essential businesses. So, it's one of those of, they can express the concern. You have to try to address it, try to alleviate the concerns. That's usually a couple conversations before you get to the point of, okay, well, we're going to have to replace you, which ultimately means they may be out of a job at the end of the day. You as a business may decide we're not just going to let them sit at home on unpaid leave, because we can't deal with that if all our workers start doing this. So it's a very tough situation, but it's just a matter of, I think it might have been Dustin who mentioned that communication, that, with work refusal cases, document that communication and all the steps you took. What were the employee suggestions? So that if you end up having to get to the point that this worker's replaced, you've got the justification to show you did everything you could to try to alleviate concerns.
Maryanne, you mentioned here that you've got an employee who has some other underlying issues as well and is now off for about the next 3 weeks. Would you like to tell us more about that, or ask a question that is relevant to the challenge you're faced with this person? Maryanne, I need you to unmute if you're trying to respond. There you go.
Yeah, just a little bit slower. Yeah, we have an employee that has some underlying health issues, which we work around on a regular basis, but he is now going to be off for at least the next 3 weeks. And we know from the information we were made aware of yesterday that possibly coming down the pipeline, there's going to be room for, after April 2nd, I believe, starting with the unemployment benefits, the extra paid leave from an employer's perspective. We're a small company. We're looking to see what we can do to help our employees, but at the same time, keep the doors open because we are working, we're commercial. We're small, but we're a commercial company. So we're looking for ideas and help on what we need to be doing.
John, Kristin, Eugene, Dustin, any thoughts on that? It sounds like this employee has, already pre-existing conditions and that Maryanne's firm works around it as much as possible, but obviously it does now present a challenge.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first, and then if others want to jump in on that. You are correct that with this new legislation coming down, if the individual, depending on if the health issues are keeping them out because of COVID concerns, if they've been ordered to self-isolate by a doctor because they're in that high-risk category, then they could be eligible for the paid sick leave. So you're all right to have that as a concern. With the paid sick leave that's coming down on the federal legislation, it's not just that the individual has decided to self-isolate or that the employer has ordered. It actually has to be that a healthcare provider has instructed them to self-isolate, or they're seeking a medical diagnosis. So there does have to be some healthcare provider involvement in the issue. So keep that in mind when you're looking at, do you have to do the paid sick leave? But yeah, for this individual, it's more than just I'm afraid to work, right? So they're in a high risk category, likely gives them the legitimate basis to be off. So it really becomes from a business perspective, do you have this individual exhaust their PTO? Potentially they've already done that. Do you end up in a layoff situation if you can no longer try to accommodate it? These are a little bit more complicated employment issues. Be happy to talk about those more with you. But those are really the issues you're going to be looking at is, when that paid legislation, or when the legislation comes online, which we've been putting out was April 2nd, because that's 15 days after President Trump signed it. Yesterday, DOL came out and said that it's going into effect on April 1, which is 14 days. So we don't know if they just failed to count the 15, if the April 1 is easier, if they will fix that. So be advised, it may be April 1 instead of April 2. Based on what DOL put out yesterday, even though April 1's not quite 15 days. So along with everything else, we have counting issues going on. But as of either April 1 or April 2, this legislation may be online and they would be entitled to that leave. So, now's the time to be thinking about, how does that look for your business? There is the small business exemption. I want to make sure everyone's aware of that. If you're under 50 employees, we don't yet have regulations on what that looks like. So what we've been told so far, DOL put out some questions and answers yesterday, is that you're going to have to document from a financial standpoint why you cannot meet the leave obligations that are in the law. And they don't want, at this time, they're not saying submit paperwork to DOL. And they said there will be regulations that cover the small business exemption. So more to come on that. I know a lot of small businesses are interested in that, and we've got to wait for the regulations to see exactly what that looks like. So my advice has been, if you think you could fall into that category, think about how you show it financially, but at the same time, think about how you may also have to meet these obligations. So with this individual, it is going to be a matter of, are you able to meet those obligations? Do they qualify? are you able to keep accommodating this person's leave? John, I'd love to hear if you got some more thoughts on that.
No, that sounds good. Yeah, go ahead, Deborah.
No, go ahead, John. I just wanted to see if you had something to say.
Yeah, no, that sounds really good. I mean, from a workers' comp perspective, again, through a preponderance of evidence, the employee has to be proven that the employee contracted an illness during the normal course and scope of performing essential job functions. So, that's the work comp lens. And then would it be a claim? If you're in question about it, you could file a claim with Pinnacol if you're a Pinnacol customer. And if there's no indemnity or monies paid out, then it's not going to negatively impact your experience modification rating. So, and certainly reach out to those other healthcare professionals to get their perspective on if the symptoms are even related to the COVID-19 illness. So it's really important to be sure we have accurate information. So that's that lens. The other piece, just kind of switching gears here a little bit, is I really, from a safety and health perspective, I wanted to reinforce the message that hierarchy of controls is the critical piece of evaluating risk. And when we're looking at hierarchy of controls, what's the best method to protect our workers? Number one is elimination, right? So if we don't have to be exposed to something, great. Okay, well, construction's essential. So we might have to be in an environment or a workplace where there could be an exposure. So the next best thing would be that social distancing, avoidance, right? My point here is that PPE, or personal protective equipment, is the last line of defense. So I want to avoid thinking that just throwing everybody a N95 mask is the solution to something. Good risk management practices is going to use that hierarchy of controls. So, and we'll share that in a handout here after the meeting. Just wanted to plug that hierarchy of controls thing.
Great, thank you. Dustin, how about you? Are you having any challenges along these lines right now?
So currently, no, not out in the field. We don't have any employees that really fit that bill. We do have a couple of office personnel that are older and maybe susceptible. So we have done the work from home version, which has been a learning curve, but is working okay. Also, I was thinking, it's kind of when somebody gets hurt at home or outside of work, but still is partially able to do something. You're not allowed to put them back on a construction site where they need to be 100% fit for work, but maybe there's something else that they can do, and that might be an option. Maybe you're a person that has the underlying conditions that needs to stay at home. Maybe they can now do something different from home, so that's where you kind of have to be creative, to find, if you want somebody to stay on, something like that. But
Great, thank you. There is some concern being expressed here among the group about not only is PPE the last line of defense, but it's also not readily available in the kind of quantities that we need it to be. And Eugene, I'm wondering if there's something you can tell us about the plans and when we might have more PPE on hand.
So not only are you all experiencing the shortage, but the state is too. The state actually stood up a specific group at the Emergency Operations Center just to deal with procurement of PPE and contracts. One of the things I would warn everybody about is I've seen many different unsolicited offers from different companies that have said that they have are able to coordinate and get PPE for the state in large quantities from either domestic or international suppliers. And we found through vetting these people that, you know, they're not all legit. So again, it's a issue that's going to be here for a while for across all industries, and even for the states, the first responders, the medical field, we're all struggling with getting the PPE, and it has opened up for a lot of fraud. There was actually from the FBI and the Joint Information Center, they put out a document that I can share. That's TLP White, so it's for public dissemination, but it talks specifically about the fraud that has come up since because of the shortage in PPE. So I wish I had a better answer for you. It's just something we're all struggling with, and the biggest threat to everybody out there is the people trying to take advantage of this shortage and fraud the companies.
Eugene, can you share with us some examples of some of that fraudulent behavior?
Right. Well, let me pull up the document really quick, and I'll read from that. But again, like we've had LLCs contact saying that they have contacts in China where they could get get this stuff, or where China had taken over American manufacturing plants over there and refitted them for PPE, and now there's some excess. And again, they say whatever they need to say to get your attention, and it's always with you need to respond quickly. We're talking to other states, or we're talking to other businesses, and you know, you're not first on the list. The first one to get into a contract will be the first one to get this. That's some of the tactics that they use to try to get people to quickly, to not vet the person or the company, and to spend money on that. But some of the advice from the white paper was that when ordering PPE from online retailers, always verify the uniform resource locator, and that's and also make sure that the web address has the HTTPS security certification on it. Consult with CDC. They have a NIOSH website to view a list of all the approved manufacturers. So you can validate the approved equipment through that website before you order anything. You can also approve the respiratory mask approval status and certification number on that same website. If procuring other categories of PPE, such as gowns, gloves, goggles, and face shields, consult the manufacturer to verify the authenticity and availability. So if they're saying they're getting M3 equipment, but they're the broker between M3, contact M3 to make sure that they actually have that equipment and that it does meet the standards. These people will send data sheets saying this is what they meet, but even those are fraudulent.
Wow. Is that something, Eugene, that you said you did say that you could share with us, that information?
Yes, I can send it. I can send it up to Marilyn and the organizers, and you guys feel free to send it out to your stakeholders.
That's great. That's really helpful. Marilyn, you wanted to add something about scam and personal security and company protection to the discussion.
Yeah, this was in one of our email messages that we sent out last week. And to Russell's point about being a single point of contact, and Deb, to your point about employers being trusted sources of information, there are FDIC, Federal Trade Commission, and SEC alerts on all three of those websites, government websites, about additional scams that unfortunately they are a risk from a cybersecurity and personal privacy and exposure of our company records challenge at all times. But we have found that there are some specific things that individuals may be targeted or that companies may be targeted with scams right now. And we want to make sure that Those things also go to employees. They're not about, they're not so much about, the safety in the workplace, but they absolutely are personal and privacy protections. And just one example is that all the robocalls we receive, there are now calls going out saying to individuals that we can expedite the payment of the stimulus money that you are scheduled to receive. We can do a direct deposit by you giving us your bank account information. And that is not accurate. That is not true. But it is something that, we certainly don't, in the midst of all of the other things going on, it's not something that we need people to be distracted by because they fell into some scam or situation. So we will make sure we have a monthly newsletter going out tomorrow, and we'll make sure that all of that information is in the newsletter. But if it's something that you could continue to help inform your employees about, not just the safety in the workplace practices, but other things to be concerned about at this time that folks might be trying to take advantage of.
Great, thank you. We've got a couple more questions here, and we are approaching 9 o'clock. From Wade Andrews, if we work in a trade where social distancing of 6 feet cannot always be maintained and PPE cannot be provided because it's not available, would OSHA and the additional municipality or state regulations require us to stop work? John, Kristin, is that something one of you can address?
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I'll jump on that from the OSHA side. We have seen some complaints to the OSHA office for that very reason. Employees have complained that they don't have enough hand washing or what it may be. So far, the Colorado offices appear to be somewhat ignoring those complaints. They send a letter to the employer that has said, "We've gotten this complaint. Please make sure you're complying. You don't even need to respond to our letter." That may change, but I think that maybe it's just they've been overloaded with those kind of complaints. So, I could see where you could get to the point of we have to stop work because we don't have the right PPE and we can't maintain social distancing. And so looking at from a general duty clause perspective, can we provide a safe and healthy workplace for our employees? I think you could get to a point that you'd say, you know what, we can no longer provide this. We are going to have to stop work. Especially if you've had an exposure in your workplace. So, we haven't yet, and I haven't yet advised anyone that they have to stop work at this time. We just haven't seen that scenario come up. But yeah, I think, especially depending on if we get exposures in your workplace, that you could get to that position that you'd have to make the decision that, we're not providing a safe and healthy workplace because we know we've got some concerns here and some exposures. We've got to stop work. But like I said, OSHA has been getting a lot of those complaints so far. They haven't. I'd like to hear from others if they have different experience. But from what we've seen, they've just been sending a letter notifying you to, make sure you're trying to comply with what the CDC recommends. But that could change as well. So just, a heads up, at least they're getting those complaints and they're giving you a letter to make sure you're trying to meet that. So yeah, if you're not meeting it, I think you've got to make the decision of, do we have to try to do this activity in a different way, kind of what John was talking about, going through that hierarchy of controls, or are we going to have to shut this job down?
Great, thank you. John, anything to add?
Oh, it's a great question. I'm not sure if this is a hypothetical or a real world scenario that we are currently in. So it's a great hypothetical question as well. Number one, conduct a job hazard assessment, evaluate the risk of exposure to our workers, and then select the right controls. I understand, well, I can't maintain a social distance of 6 feet, or I can't get the proper personal protective equipment. So then, yeah, is the employer intentionally exposing their workers to this situation? That would be something that would legally be evaluated. OSHA would evaluate,
Okay.
So yeah, okay, yeah, go ahead.
No, I didn't want to cut you off, John. I do want to get this one last question in.
Yeah.
And this comes from Justin Smith. You know, what is the process to provide credentials to our employees who do not have company labeled vehicles, indicating that they are allowed to be out during stay-at-home mandates? Is there any good answer to that?
Yeah, I think my CEO has put out a letter saying that it's a real simple letter that he just wrote up and signed. Said, you know, to whom it may concern, the person possessing this letter is an employee of our company and licensed electrician or apprentice registered to the state. And, you know, and he just citing the governor's mandate stating that they're essential services, and then put his contact information on there. We sent that email out to everyone in the company. I also have a bunch printed out in case somebody doesn't have a printer, so that they can have them, you know, and I'll be going through my jobs and passing those letters out. And I think that one's pretty simple. You know, management has to do that for your guys. And I also wanted to touch on the 6-foot rule with the OSHA. Just like John said, he hit it on the nail on the head with that one with the JSA or JHA. You know, that's a job hazard. You know, you've got to analyze that and figure out how to work around that and create the control for that. And it's simple, and it's part of same thing as your slips, trips, and falls. You know, it's a new hazard that's here, and that's really pay attention to that and take those appropriate steps to protect our guys.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Just to add to that very briefly, so OSHA is only going to issue a citation if there's not only, but relatively, this is what the field operation manual says. Is there a hazard? Is there an employee exposed to the hazard? Is there a written statutory standard, vertical or horizontal standard related to the hazard? Did the employer have knowledge of the hazard? Did the employer take a reasonable means and attempt to abate that hazard? Okay. And then in this case, it wouldn't apply, but would it be a repeat or willful, right? I mean, did the employer allow this to happen from a prior situation? So those are some things to consider. Go ahead, Deborah. Thank you.
Great. I also think, does anyone, we're getting close to time, but does anyone have any thoughts or ideas or anything unique that you are doing in terms of getting creative about social distancing? You know, the 6-foot rule is not necessarily mandatory at construction sites, but is recommended. Is there anybody have any thoughts or done something that has helped you at least try to keep that as a somewhat, you know, way of operating? Kind of challenging. Dustin, any thoughts?
Yeah, so our service department actually, we ran into somebody at a vehicle repair shop, and all the guys were wearing gloves, not just the rubber gloves, not just in the shop, but in the whole, everyone was wearing them. And they asked why, and they said, well, they touch their face less, and they kind of, you know, it keeps all their germs inside themselves, and, you know, they wash their hands a little more often, and, you know, it's simple things like that. And I found that the auto parts stores, a lot of them still have those gloves. The masks, not so much. But so we went around town last weekend and got a bunch of gloves and bagged them up in like 10 packs for our guys, and so they can just grab a bag of 10, and especially for our service technicians that are in other projects or in somebody's business, you know, where we don't have as much of a controlled environment. We found that it's helping to not touch our faces more and you know, wash our hands a little more often. So stuff like that.
Okay, great. One comment. Construction sites are exempt from the public health rules. We have our construction employees in gloves and hard hat face shields. not perfect, but best we can do at this stage. That's one more way of dealing with this. Okay, I am
one
going
last
to.
quick, very quick.
Oh, go ahead, John.
One last very quick point. Yeah, just getting down to kind of those more nuts and bolts of the day-to-day activities. One last very quick point. It's advised not to use compressed air or like high pressure water spray, you know, for cleaning something, because it could aerosolize that virus. So avoid cleaning something with a pressurized device.
I would have never thought of that. Okay. All right, we've got a couple minutes left. I'd like to hand it to Marilyn to wrap us up. And we are hoping to make this recording available to everyone and capture all of the URLs that have been shared in the chat feature. And so know that, and I'm going to give it to Marilyn to take us home.
Awesome, Deb. Thank you, Deb, for facilitating us today. Thank you for, we have a number of IECRM board members and Board of Trustee members that were able to participate in the call today. And I want to thank you for taking the time to be on the call. We have a board meeting in the morning, and we will be discussing many of these issues and items that have been addressed and how we can continue to share information with you. But at any time, please do feel free to reach out to us as an association. You are making an investment in us as a member, and we want to make sure that we are providing the services and benefits and expertise that you need right now outside while you're trying to run your companies and you know, keep the industry moving forward. So appreciate all of your time today. Do feel free to continue to get in touch with us along the way. Paul, thank you for being our host and facilitating us through this with Deb today. I really appreciate all of you. And I'll put in a final plug for, we do this every month. Today's Wednesday, the last Wednesday of the month, we have a safety forum with a whole variety of topics. So if you are interested in being on that distribution and participating with us further on other topics and perhaps continuing this conversation in April, please email me or Paul, our first names at iecrm.org. Go out and have a wonderful day, whether you're at home or out and about, and everyone please stay well.
And thank you to Kristin, to John, to Eugene, and to Dustin for being available today and providing such helpful and very important information.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. And just a reminder that we have our next safety forum, at least on the schedule for now. It's 811 locate and overhead power lines with XL Energy and 811, scheduled for the 29th. So that's what's on the calendar today. It could change, but let us know if you're interested, and we will get you connected and get you on the Zoom meeting. Thank you all so much.
Thanks.